They're pissed because their game backfired horribly, and now they don't know what to do. You see, when people play with others' emotions, when they manipulate trust, when they engage in deception, thinking they're 10 steps ahead, they almost always forget the cost. Not the cost to you, no, the cost to themselves. Because when you base your actions on lies, your life begins to rot from the inside out. It may not happen right away. It may even look like they're winning for a time, but eventually the illusion collapses, and what's left is shame, regret, and the searing awareness that the mask no longer works. They underestimated you. That's what really stings them. They assumed your silence meant weakness. They confused your loyalty with naivety. They saw your kindness and mistook it for stupidity. And so they thought they could spin their web, pull their strings, and control the narrative. But what they didn't expect was that you'd walk away, that you'd stop feeding their ego, that you'd choose peace over chaos, truth over pretense, and integrity over the comfort of staying in their game. They didn't anticipate your evolution because it exposed their deception. And now their plan, it didn't just fail, it blew up in their face. People like that are terrified of accountability. They don't want to face themselves in the mirror. They want others to carry the burden of their dysfunction. That's why they manipulate. That's why they play games, because they can't stomach the truth of their own emptiness. So when you rise above them, when you reclaim your power, they don't feel relieved. They feel exposed. And in that exposure, they're furious. Because the one thing they counted on, you staying broken, didn't happen. You healed. And that healing, that's their defeat. The rage they carry now, it's not about you, it's about the shame they refuse to face. It's about the collapse of the control they once had. It's about the reality that their tactics no longer work. And that's terrifying to someone who depends on illusion to survive. You've become a mirror to their failure, not because you tried to hurt them, but because you simply stopped allowing yourself to be hurt. That's what really eats at them. The fact that you didn't play along, the fact that you chose authenticity over revenge, the fact that you walked away without a dramatic exit, without a fight, just the clean, steady silence of someone who's done. And now they're left with the consequences of their own choices, the fallout of their own lies. You see, people who manipulate always think they're smarter than everyone else. They play short games, not realizing life is a long one. They look for temporary gratification while sacrificing lasting peace. But peace doesn't come through domination, it comes through truth, and that's why they have none. They're agitated, restless, resentful, not because you hurt them, but because they couldn't destroy you. There's something deeply powerful about walking away from a game you were never meant to play. It disrupts the entire structure they were trying to maintain. It forces them to confront the reality that power doesn't come from control, it comes from self-respect. And that's what you now represent, a threat to their delusion, your calmness, your refusal to retaliate, your decision to heal. That's the loudest thing you could have ever done, because silence has a weight. And yours, it's crushing them. Let them be angry. Let them fume. That anger is just fear in disguise. It's the fear of being seen for who they truly are. It's the fear of being irrelevant now that you've detached. It's the fear of being unable to manipulate again. And that fear, that's their own prison. You don't have to participate in it. You don't have to prove anything. You've already won, not by playing better, but by choosing not to play at all. That's strength. That's victory. That's transformation. They thought the game was about power, but you showed them it was about character, and they failed, not because you destroyed them, but because they destroyed their own integrity trying to outsmart the truth. Now they have to live with that. You, on the other hand, are free, not just from them, but from the part of you that once tolerated it. And that freedom, that evolution, it's the one thing they'll never understand, because it requires the humility they never developed. Let them be pissed. Let them spiral. You've got better things to build. They mistook your kindness for weakness. And that was their first and most devastating miscalculation. They believed your compassion was a flaw, not a strength. They looked at your patience and thought it was passivity. They saw your loyalty and assumed you were blind. But that's where people like that always go wrong. They measure others by their own brokenness. They think everyone is playing the same game they are. a game of manipulation, of masks, of selfish wins. So when they encounter someone genuine, someone real, someone who offers their heart without strategy or deception, they don't know what to do with it. And instead of valuing it, they take advantage of it. They believed you were predictable. They thought they could wound you slowly, subtly, while keeping you within reach. Like a puppet they could bend at will. You forgave when they didn't deserve it. You gave them second chances when they had no intention of changing, and in their twisted logic, they took your grace as proof that you were beneath them, as if boundaries were a sign of strength and mercy, a sign of stupidity. That's what happens when you try to understand a deep soul through the shallow lens of power. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, is that kindness isn't weakness. It's a conscious choice. It's strength held back. It's power restrained. It's the decision to offer peace when you could declare war. And for the longest time, you chose peace. Not because you were afraid of confrontation, but because you hoped they would see the value in something honest. You thought that maybe, just maybe, if you showed them what it looked like to be loyal, to be true, they would rise to meet you there. That's not weakness, that's faith, that's heart, and it's rare. So you stayed longer than you should have. You explained things they didn't deserve to hear. You gave love in places where there was none returned, and they used that against you. They twisted your virtues into vulnerabilities, and in doing so, they told themselves a story. That you were naive, that you couldn't survive without them, that you lacked the spine to ever walk away. That story made them feel powerful. It justified their manipulation. It allowed them to believe that they were in control. But then came the moment they never expected. The moment when you finally saw them clearly, when the veil lifted, when the weight of everything they'd done caught up to you, and your heart, weary and bruised, decided it had had enough. And you didn't scream, you didn't retaliate, you didn't descend to their level. You simply stopped showing up, you stopped responding, you stopped giving them the access they once used like a weapon. You chose yourself. And that, more than anything, shattered them. Because the one thing manipulators can't handle is losing the person they thought they could always break. The one who kept giving even when it hurt. The one who stayed silent out of love, not fear. They thought they could keep playing the game, but the game only works if the other person remains on the board. And you picked up your pieces and walked away quietly, with dignity, without needing to make a scene. Now they're furious, not because you did something wrong, but because you finally did something right for yourself. Because when you stopped answering their chaos with compassion, when you stopped letting them rewrite your reality, you took their illusion of control and crushed it. And now they're left with a truth they can't spin. You were never weak. You were just kind. And they mistook that for something they could dominate. Let that sink in. They're not upset because you failed them. They're upset because you rose, because your strength revealed their weakness, because your growth highlighted their stagnation, because your silence echoed louder than all their noise. They're not just angry at you, they're angry at themselves, though they'll never say it, because deep down they know they had something rare in you, and they chose to exploit it instead of protect it. That's the tragedy of those who live by deception. They destroy the very things that could have saved them, and by the time they realize what they've done, it's too late. The kind person has left. The loyal one has grown. The silent one has found their voice, not to argue, not to plead, but to walk away with conviction. And that's when they finally see your kindness was never a weakness. It was a gift, one they didn't deserve, one they'll never get back. Now all they have is the silence, the emptiness, the void left by someone they thought they could manipulate forever. And no matter how loud their anger gets, no matter how much they try to twist the story to make themselves feel better, the truth haunts them. They played the game, and it backfired because in trying to break someone they saw as weak, they revealed the true weakness in themselves. And you're not broken. You're not bitter. You're better, stronger, wiser, and above all, free. Your growth exposed their deception, and that's why they can't stand you now. See, when you start to rise, when you begin healing, evolving, becoming more than what they convinced you to believe you were, you threaten the very foundation of their identity, because their manipulation only worked when you were doubting yourself. Their power only existed when you were second-guessing your worth. As long as you were stuck in the fog of their lies, they could control the narrative. They could tell themselves you needed them, that they were above you, that their twisted version of events was truth. But once you started waking up, the whole structure began to collapse. They lived in a world where you were small, where your potential was hidden under self-doubt, fear, and misplaced loyalty. A world they helped create, where your confidence was chipped away little by little. Not always through direct attacks, but through subtle dismissals, gaslighting, withholding affection, rewriting history. These weren't just bad behaviors, they were calculated moves, not always consciously, but deeply rooted in the need to stay one step above you. Because if you ever saw yourself clearly, if you ever realized your strength, your clarity, your power, it would reveal just how hollow their own strength really was. And then it happened. You started to change. Maybe quietly at first. You began asking questions. You began creating space. You stopped reacting the way you used to. You no longer rushed to explain yourself, no longer tried to fix what they kept breaking. You became still, observant, grounded, and that terrified them, because the more grounded you became, the more unstable they felt. They realized the spell was breaking, and that's when the panic set in. Growth doesn't just heal you, it shines light on everything that was wrong. When you evolve, you bring truth with you, and the truth is loud. It doesn't need to scream, it just is. Your calm presence begins to expose their chaos. Your boundaries highlight their disrespect. Your new standards unveil their manipulation. You didn't even need to confront them directly. Your very existence as a person who refused to be fooled anymore was the confrontation. And that's what enrages people like that, being seen. Because for the first time, they weren't in control of the narrative. They couldn't twist your words, couldn't deflect the blame, couldn't distract you with guilt. You had changed, you'd grown, and growth makes it impossible to go back to illusions. It's like waking up from a bad dream. Once you're conscious, you can't pretend you're still asleep. They saw that in you, and it terrified them. And what's worse for them is that you didn't just grow privately. Others began to notice too. Your energy shifted. You started to glow differently. People began asking questions. The version of you they painted, the weak one, the unstable one, the emotional one, was vanishing. And in its place stood someone powerful, composed, and clear-eyed. Their lies didn't match what people were now seeing. That contrast was unbearable for them because it forced them to face their own inconsistencies. They became defensive, even angry. Suddenly you were acting different, too cold or selfish. But you weren't being selfish. You were just done being used. And that distinction, it pierced their illusion like a blade. You no longer gave them access to your emotions like you used to. No more emotional outbursts for them to manipulate. No more vulnerable moments for them to exploit. Your silence became louder than anything you'd ever said before, and it left them exposed, naked in a world where they thrived on deception. Because here's the truth. They never had power over you. They only had the illusion of power, given to them by your own uncertainty. Once you became certain of who you are, that illusion evaporated. And without it, they were left with the truth of themselves. And that truth was hard, bitter, and painful, not because you tried to hurt them, but because your light revealed how dark their actions had been. And some people can't handle being seen in the light. It's easier for them to hate your transformation than to confront their betrayal. But you didn't grow for revenge. You grew for peace. You grew because you were tired of living small to protect someone else's ego. You grew because you were tired of suffering in silence while someone else played the victim. You grew because you realized your life was not meant to be spent in survival mode, and in doing so, you broke the cycle. You became the one who escaped the lie, and in that act of self-respect, you became dangerous to them, not because you were cruel, but because you refused to be controlled. They don't hate you because you lied. They hate you because you stopped believing their lies. That's what they can't forgive. That's what truly haunts them. Not that you exposed them publicly, but that you exposed them internally. You made them face themselves. And now every time they see your peace, your growth, your confidence, it reminds them of who they could have been if they hadn't chosen the path of manipulation. It reminds them that they lost something pure, something good, and they did it with their own hands. That's the beauty of your transformation. It didn't just save you, it revealed them. Your silence is louder than their rage, and that's what's driving them mad. See, when someone is used to controlling the narrative, they depend on your reactions. They feed off your explanations, your tears, your anger. As long as you're responding, they still have access to your energy. You're still in the game. But when you go silent, not out of defeat, but out of clarity, they lose everything. Not just control over you, but the illusion that they mattered more than your peace. And that silence becomes a mirror they can't escape. They wanted you to scream. They wanted you to break down, to beg, to plead, to explode, because then they could point and say, look, see, they're unstable, they're emotional, they're the problem. That's how manipulators operate. They create chaos and then accuse you of overreacting to it. They push you, pull you, gaslight you until you can't see straight, and then blame you for stumbling. But when you refuse to play that game anymore, when you stopped giving them the benefit of your emotional investment, you took away the very thing they relied on, your engagement. That's the thing they never expected, that your strength would show up as absence, that your greatest act of power would be walking away quietly, leaving no door open for further damage. They don't know how to handle that kind of stillness. They interpret silence as punishment because they live in noise. They're used to drama, to conflict, to constant motion. Your silence isn't just a lack of words, it's the end of their relevance in your story. And that's unbearable to someone who built their identity on being in control. They're raging now because they're powerless, because they can't reach you like they used to, because your detachment says more than 1,000 confrontations ever could. It tells them without a word, you don't deserve another explanation. You don't get another piece of me. And that, more than any argument, destroys them. It strips them of their false superiority. It makes them sit with the fact that they're no longer the center of your world, that you've reclaimed your time, your focus, your dignity. And they can't twist that into something ugly because there's nothing left for them to manipulate. Silence confuses people who are used to getting away with harm. They expect you to fight back because fighting means you still care. But when you withdraw, when you no longer explain or justify or defend yourself, it signals a deeper truth. They no longer matter, not to your peace, not to your journey, not to your future. And that realization, more than any shouted truth, is what unsettles them. It's not that you didn't have things to say. You had oceans of pain, pages of betrayal, volumes of truths they refused to hear, but you learned that not everyone is worthy of your voice. Some people hear your words only to twist them. Some listen only to respond, not to understand. So you chose silence, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Because when you've seen enough, felt enough, lost enough of yourself trying to explain the obvious, you realize that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing and walk away. And the irony, that silence is now the loudest thing in their life. It echoes in the spaces where your presence used to be. It follows them in the quiet moments when their lies no longer work, when the attention they craved falls silent too. They thought they'd win by pushing you out, but now they're stuck with themselves, and your absence exposes everything they tried to cover up. They tell themselves you're cold, that you changed, that you never cared. But deep down, they know the truth. They were warned. You didn't just disappear. You gave them chance after chance, tried to fix what they kept breaking, stayed long after your soul started to dim. Your silence wasn't sudden. It was earned. It was the final act of someone who had finally realized their worth. And that realization, that you're no longer willing to shrink for someone who refused to grow, that's what haunts them. Let them rage. Let them throw accusations into the air, trying to provoke a response. That's not your burden anymore. You don't need to defend your peace. You don't need to explain your silence. The ones who get it, and the ones who don't, they were never listening anyway. What matters is that you're free, that you no longer need to be heard to know your truth, that you've outgrown the need to prove anything to anyone who only saw your heart as a tool for control. In a world obsessed with noise, your silence is your liberation, and to those who once thrived on your chaos, it is their defeat. Their anger is a mask for their shame, and it's eating them alive. On the surface, they might act enraged, bitter, even self-righteous. They may blame you, mock you, spread lies about you, or pretend they're unaffected. But deep down behind all that noise is the uncomfortable truth they're desperate to hide. They know exactly what they did, and they know they were wrong. The anger, that's just the cover story. It's the shield they hold up so they don't have to face the raw, humiliating guilt of realizing they destroyed something good, something that didn't deserve to be broken. Shame is a powerful emotion. It doesn't scream like anger does. It whispers in the quiet. It follows people into silence. It haunts them when the noise fades. That's what they're feeling now, but they'll never admit it, because admitting shame means admitting fault. It means dropping the act. And people who manipulate, who deceive, who lie to themselves as much as they lie to others, they don't know how to face fault. It terrifies them. So instead they lash out, they rage, they find external enemies because looking inward would break them. You became a mirror. That's the problem. Not because you told them off or exposed them, but because you walked away with your integrity intact. You didn't stoop to their level. You didn't play the revenge game. And that unsettled them more than anything. Because when someone is filled with guilt and self-loathing, seeing someone they hurt rise with dignity is unbearable. It forces them to feel everything they've tried to avoid. Your silence holds them accountable more than any argument could. Every time they think about you, they're reminded of what they did and what they lost. And that's the worst part for them, not losing control, not losing access, but losing your respect. Because even if they pretend not to care, they do, deeply. You weren't just someone they hurt, you were someone who saw their potential, someone who gave them grace, who loved them despite their flaws. And now, knowing they betrayed that, knowing they burned a bridge they didn't have the wisdom to maintain, that shame cuts deep, but they don't know how to process it. So they bury it under layers of anger, denial, projection. They'll paint themselves as the victim because it's easier than admitting they were the villain. They'll say you abandoned them, that you changed, that you were too sensitive or too much, all to avoid the sickening feeling of regret that lives just beneath the surface. But inside, where the truth lives, away from the noise and the defense mechanisms, they know. They know you were good to them. They know you didn't deserve it, and they know they can't go back. There's a reason they're still talking about you, still thinking about you, still trying to twist the narrative. It's not because they've moved on, it's because they haven't, and they can't. Because what they lost wasn't replaceable, it wasn't casual, it wasn't something they can forget or bury under new distractions. You were real. And now that they've lost you, they're forced to sit with the reality of who they are without your light in their life. That's where the shame lives, in that gaping void. They didn't expect to feel this way. When they made their moves, when they played their game, they thought they were winning. They thought they were strong. But strength built on lies and pride eventually turns into weakness. Because when you betray someone who genuinely cared, you don't walk away clean. You carry the stain of that choice. You carry the guilt, even if you pretend otherwise. And over time, that guilt begins to rot the soul. You may never hear them admit it. They may never apologize, never take accountability, never tell the truth. But don't mistake silence for peace. There's a war inside them now, one they created, one they have to fight alone. And every time they see you living in your truth, growing, healing, becoming more than they ever imagined, it stirs the shame again, because you were supposed to stay broken. You were supposed to stay small. They thought if they dimmed your light, theirs would shine brighter. But all they did was blind themselves. Let them rage. Let them project. Let them wear their anger like armor. You don't have to respond. You don't have to defend your name. The truth defends itself. And over time, their mask will crack because rage fades, anger burns out, but shame lingers. And when all the dust settles, they'll still be left with the truth they can't outrun. They ruined something beautiful, not by accident, but by choice. And the consequences of that choice will follow them far longer than they expected. You, on the other hand, are free. You felt the pain, faced the darkness, and chose to rise. You let go, not because it didn't matter, but because you knew you mattered more. That's what makes the difference. You owned your story. They're still running from theirs. And until they stop hiding behind the mask of anger, they'll never find peace. Because deep down, they don't hate you. They hate themselves for losing you. Their anger is not power, it's not dominance, it's not control, it's a mask, a cover for something far more fragile, shame that's been growing like a cancer inside them. And what's terrifying for them now is that the mask is starting to slip. No matter how loud they shout, how much they blame you, how many people they try to turn against you, there's something inside them they can't drown out anymore. That quiet, piercing awareness, they did this to themselves. You didn't destroy them. You didn't expose them. You didn't take revenge. But your growth, your silence, your refusal to crawl back, that did something much worse in their eyes. It revealed that they were never as powerful as they thought. It proved that your value was not tied to their approval. And now they're spiraling, not because you wronged them, but because you didn't. You didn't lower yourself. You didn't become bitter. You rose. And that kind of rising forces people like them to confront the stark difference between who they pretended to be and who you actually became. The more they see you winning quietly, healing with grace, and moving forward without them, the more unbearable their own reflection becomes. They can't stand who they are without your presence to manipulate, without your heart to twist, without your kindness to absorb like a parasite. And that, more than anything, is where their shame is rooted. Not just in the act of hurting you, but in the loss of the one person who still saw good in them when they couldn't even see it in themselves. That's the part they'll never say out loud. You were the safe space. You were the one who loved them through their damage. You were the mirror that showed them potential, hope, redemption. And instead of choosing to grow with you, they chose to exploit that love. Because growth takes courage, vulnerability, accountability. They didn't have that, so they attacked the very person who could have helped them transform. And now, long after you've let go, they're still shackled to the prison they built for themselves. Anger becomes their default response because shame feels like weakness to them. They were taught to dominate, not reflect, to blame, not introspect, to survive through manipulation rather than connection. So they rage, but their rage is hollow. It has no foundation because it's not based on truth. It's a defense mechanism, a scream to drown out the whisper that keeps haunting them. You lost something real, and you did it with your own hands. That's why they can't stop talking about you. That's why they check your social media. That's why they try to twist the story or reinvent history. They're trying to outrun shame by rewriting reality. But no matter what they say, the facts don't change. You were genuine. You were there. You were loyal, and they were reckless with it. They played a game and lost someone they now realize they never truly deserved. And instead of humbling themselves, they lash out. But every time they do, the shame tightens its grip because deep down they know you never fought them. You just outgrew them. And here's the truth they can't face. You didn't need to ruin them. They're doing it to themselves. The longer they refuse to own what they did, the longer they carry that invisible weight. And over time, that weight grows heavier. It isolates them. It hardens them. It poisons every new relationship because they haven't healed, they haven't learned, and they haven't changed. They're still living in the same pattern, blaming others, raging at ghosts, while you've stepped into a version of yourself that they'll never get access to again. Let that be enough for you. You don't need to explain your side, seek closure, or wait for an apology. Sometimes your peace is the only closure you'll get, and it's enough. Because while they're trapped in a loop of denial and blame, you're free. You're no longer seeking their validation, and that freedom is a kind of justice. A quiet, permanent justice that echoes every time they remember how things could have been if only they had chosen differently. So let them wear their anger like armor. You know what's underneath it. You've seen the truth. You've lived it. And now you've risen from it. That's something they'll have to live with long after the noise fades. Because rage may be loud, but shame never forgets.